Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to another author interview here on Tales from the Wandering Scribe. I'm your host, Gabriel Garcia, otherwise known as the Wandering Quill and the Wandering Scribe. And joining me today is an author making their official debut here on the show. Now, my guest today grew up in a small Midwestern town and earned her BFA in video game art and design just outside Chicago. Since then, she has lived all over Illinois, Iowa, New Mexico, South Florida, and now tucked away in the Rocky Mountains of Colorado with hopes to move and settle somewhere else eventually. She may be pushing 40, but her artistic energy, passion, and creativity have stayed delightfully intact and just as obsessively alive as they were when she was little. She's a stay at home homeschooling mom of two and a lifelong animal lover with an unapologetic appreciation for all things nerdy. When she's not teaching or parenting, she's usually writing, drawing, gaming, hiking, or dreaming up her next big adventure. Creating worlds through stories and art has always been her favorite kind of magic. And speaking of magic, we will be talking about our guest's upcoming work, which you can see right behind her, which is Star Relic. So without further ado, let's give a huge round of applause to today's guest, Miss Velora Venn. Velora, welcome to the show.
Hi, thank you so much for having me. As Gabe said, I'm Velora Venn, or just Vel if you prefer. I've been obsessed with writing and drawing since I was a child. So all of my books have artwork included in them by me. And drawing and writing have been a part of my life since childhood. I remember even asking my mom to publish the little books that I made as a kid. So this has definitely been a lifelong passion and dream for me. Also, I wanted to say how fitting it is we're chatting today since it just so happens to be National Book Lovers Day.
That is true. That is very true, Vel. And honestly, thank you for actually reminding me about that just now because I actually just looked on a post from a friend of mine and it's like, it is really fitting. And honestly, I cannot think of a better day to have you on the show than this day in particular. So, speaking of books, as viewers will also know, you also have another poster of another work you've worked on in the past. So,
Mhm.
as a little icebreaker question, as mentioned in your bio, that creativity has been an integral part of your life. What would you definitely say was your aha moment that put you on this path, that pushed you to create your book, Aegis, initially, and then now working on Star Relic?
So that's a great question. With my Ages series, I think I can't even remember. It was probably around 7 years ago now. Yeah, around 7 years that I started that one. And it was just something that I think actually I started that when I was kind of challenging myself to write from the perspective of a male and also a villain. So the prologues are always from the perspective of this particular character. And then the main character is a female. And then with my new series, Star Relic, I've always loved sapphic stories and have been proudly pro LGBTQIA+. But She-Ra and the Princesses of Power on Netflix made me realize just how much I long to see heartfelt, epic queer stories that centered in both sci-fi and fantasy worlds. And it hit me that I've had this story waiting inside of me. So Star Relic blends so many themes of She-Ra with the amalgam tech and exploration of the Horizon Zero Dawn games, along with the energy and songs of K-pop Demon Hunters, although I finished the first draft before that movie released, but it's still incredibly in line with that whole vibe. So as soon as the idea for this popped into my head, I immediately set to work writing Star Relic, and I haven't looked back since.
Wow, amazing, Val. Absolutely amazing. So let's actually dive into the creation of Star Relic. So, as a few little fun icebreaker questions, as well as a few fan questions sprinkled throughout. When you began writing Star Relic, did you begin with an outline, or are you an author that is more sporadic and spontaneous?
That's a good question. So with Star Relic, I had a lot of ideas that I knew I wanted to incorporate, and I just made a new note document and just wrote as much as I could down, and then I organized all of that. But I would say, more of a pantser, so I will tend to write and let my characters kind of take the reins of the story, if you will. But I do have hundreds of pages of notes just for Star Relic. So a lot of background information and a lot of character bios and descriptions of a lot of places and things like that. But as far as the whole plot and everything that takes place in the story goes, a lot of that is more on the fly for me.
Okay, all right. And kind of leading from that, and I actually want to make a mention to Aegis, the Aegis series. So
Mhm.
for the Aegis series, did you have like a ritual or routine that got you in the flow to where you could finish that series of books and have that transferred over to Star Relic?
So when I was writing all of the Aegis books, actually, I wrote them all on my phone. It was right after my daughter was born. And so she would be taking a lot of naps on me. And out of, boredom, I guess, I was just writing on my phone. And so I didn't really have a ritual or anything like that back then. I was just kind of writing whenever I had the time. And and when that wrapped up, I actually have a second series that I wrote
Ooh.
called, well, I have the first book published called Hearts of Stone. And that's a paranormal romance with a gargoyle kind of character. And after that, the getting into Star Relic just kind of happened really naturally. I still haven't, I'm kind of in between my books now, because now I have two work in progresses going on with Hearts of Stone and Star Relic, but Relic really has my heart right now.
Ooh, fascinating. Fascinating. And speaking of Star Relic, what is ultimately your goal with that series in terms of, being the author, but also the promise you're making to your readers? And is it the same promise that you've had throughout all of your books?
Oh, that's actually a great question. I think my promise has probably changed with Star Relic. So with Star Relic, I feel like you'll be seen and you'll feel deeply. You'll root for the heroes who defy the odds and embrace their truth. I want as many people as possible to see themselves reflected in this series in some way, even if it's challenging or uncomfortable at times. I believe it has the potential to be very, very relatable for a lot of readers, despite taking place in a fantastical sci-fi setting. There's really something for pretty much everyone in Starlick, I feel like. It includes things like animal familiars who level up their bonds and transform into winged mounts, to planet hopping and banter and a morally gray love interest, alternating POVs, magical creature type card game, and fun fictional elements to the realistic themes and experiences that fit the narrative. And actually, this binder right back here includes the card game. I've had some of the cards that I've done the artwork for printed. And as far as my other books go, I feel like my promise for readers would be something more. I think the relatability factor is something that I always try to strive for with all of my books, even if they are kind of more, heavy on fantasy or sci-fi themes.
Absolutely. And now let's talk a little bit about characters. Now, here's the first fan question one of my viewers wishes to ask. So,
Mhm.
Vel, for your characters in Star Relics, how do you make them complex and yet authentic to the world that you have written them into?
Well, I think for my characters, I tend to find very, very relatable things that people go through in their day-to-day lives, or I feature a lot of neurodivergent characters, queer characters, characters with disabilities, and I'll build off of these ideas that I have in my head and then kind of also relate those to characters that I've seen in other books or media or people that I actually know, and kind of just flesh them out from there.
Okay, all right. And kind of on that topic, another fan question which ties perfectly to this. So, as you mentioned earlier, She-Ra was one of many inspirations for the world as for the characters. But I'm very curious, are there any other characters or film media that played a role in some scale to Star Relic in terms of, the world building, a magic system, or anything in general?
Yeah. So as I mentioned, the Horizon Zero Dawn games were a very big influence too. I just love those stories so much. And what else? I'm sure there are many things. It's just thinking of them on the fly. So as with the magic too, I think that kind of was something that I built off of from my experience doing a lot of magic planning with my Earth's Etheric Aegis series. I had a lot that I could kind of, incorporate from that and then change in different ways for it to suit this book. So I think that kind of helped a lot with writing this first.
All right, all right. And kind of still falling into, the world building of stories, what have you found to be the most challenging? Writing a world that's immersive, gripping, and engaging, or writing a world that really hones in on the five senses? Or do you think there's an overlap between the two?
Hmm. I haven't thought about that. I think with the senses, that's a really interesting way of approaching this. So I think when I write my stories, I do try to incorporate a lot of that. And I'm sorry, what was the question again?
No problem, no problem. So, in what have you found to be the most challenging in terms of, writing the sort of setting and like the atmosphere of your stories? A story or a setting that is
Mhm.
immersive and engaging, or a story and its setting that appeals to the five senses? Or do you think there's an overlap between the two? Can a world be immersive because it appeals to the five senses?
Yes, I believe it can. And, I think trying to accomplish that with these types of stories that take place in other worlds or universes can be a little more challenging since you're the one that's inventing all of these things and responsible for having that translate over to the readers. But I think for me it's just been kind of a muscle memory type thing because I've been writing for almost my whole life, off and on. So it just kind of comes with my passion, I guess you could say.
Absolutely, absolutely. And one last final fan question of this portion before we go into the more personal reflective questions. It comes down to emotions and conflict. So when you're writing your stories, how do you balance out the emotional depth with the conflict? And what is probably your favorite way as an author and storyteller to introduce conflict into your stories?
So I think emotional depth is a very big thing for the conflict, especially in my stories. I have a frenemy crush in Star Relic, and so that's an ongoing conflict throughout the book, and that adds a lot of emotional heartache throughout the everything going on as well. So that's something that I've been having a lot of fun with Star Relic, is exploring that kind of dynamic in their relationship. And I think that's kind of been the most interesting and fun thing for me as a writer when it comes to conflict. I have other conflicts going on that are much more, that impact the world more, but that kind of more personal one is the one that's been the most fun for me.
Absolutely, absolutely. And now let's look into some more reflective questions, questions about you as an author, Belle. Now, as I'm course you'll definitely agree, writing a book is definitely a lonely process and sometimes a very frustrating process, especially when we can't get our ideas down on paper. It is nerve-wracking, it is infuriating, and it can get the best of all of us. So for you, Val, how do you tackle writer's block?
For me, I think I'm a little bit lucky on that end because I have such limited free time. So whenever I am able to write, which is usually early in the mornings before my kids wake up, I just go at it, and I'm all about getting everything I can out there written down. But the moments that I do suffer writer's block, I think what works for me personally, because I am an artist, I will just kind of switch and go from one to the other. So if I'm feeling more artistic and creative that day, then I'll go and do that instead. And that's just a whole different way of expressing myself creatively. And that's always seemed to work really well for me. Just taking breaks and taking time to do other things that I enjoy is just, I think that's the solution.
Absolutely, absolutely. And still touching on the topic of, writing is a very lonely journey. I've also made a point to ask about, when as authors do we feel comfortable sharing our work? Because as authors, depending on the stage where we're at with our writing, we're very private people. And
Mhm.
sometimes we will share our work either in the beginning with our friends and family or sometimes at the very end. Now, for you, Vel, in particular, when did you tell your friends and family that you were embarking on this journey of being an author, beginning with Aegis and now working on Star Relic?
So I think it kind of depends on the people, on your trust level with the people that
Hmm.
you're communicating with. So it does kind of vary. With my Aegis series, I think I probably told people after it was published. I have one friend in particular, though, who's a avid reader, and she was my beta reader for that, and actually is also one of my beta readers for Star Relic. So she learned early on. And same with Star Relic. So I made the mistake, I would say, of inviting her to read the first draft of Star Relic. And now looking back, it's almost a completely different manuscript than what it is today. But I have trust in her, and I'm not too ashamed that she read that version, I would say. But for other people, as long as I'm getting my edits in and getting it further along, I'm okay with them reading and being beta readers for my friends.
Awesome, Vel. That is awesome. And this leads to another reflective question in terms of, sharing and who you trust. And this question in particular talks about, being authors in the digital age because the industry has changed within the last 20 something years. Indie
Mhm.
authors are on the rise. There's a majority of indie authors dominating the publishing industry, which is amazing. But, pardon me, even with that said, there is still this hesitancy to share one's work, especially now with social media. Social media is kind of like a second limb for creatives. It allows us to network, it allows us to interact with our readers and our fans. But there's also the other side of social media, which is very negative, very deplorable, very nasty, the double edged sword effect. And that can be very detrimental to a creative's mental health and overall well being. And of course, imposter syndrome is always going to be there. It's never going to go away. I don't care who tells you what, it's always going to be there. So for you, Vel, did you ever have any moments of heightened anxiety or imposter syndrome when it came to publicizing your work? And what has disciplined you to still publicize your work as well as make artwork for your books and characters, and also, as you mentioned earlier, your binder, which has some artwork in card form of the characters.
So I think I've been pretty lucky so far to not have run into any of that negativity, really. Luckily, the writing community usually is a very encouraging, uplifting space. But I think getting yourself out there is always a scary thing. And most writers do. I would say every writer has imposter syndrome, just like with most fields that exist. So it's definitely something that's going to happen. And really, all you can do is believe in yourself and trust that these stories that you have in your head are there for a reason. And you're meant to get them out there, and just, have faith that it's all going to work out, because as long as you believe it, it will. And everything, I think, will, work out to your benefit.
Absolutely. And kind of like a follow-up to this question for you, Vel, I don't know if you've ever encountered these on your books, but how do you handle, or how would you handle negative reviews or critiques?
So I think the negative reviews are probably actually some helpful ones, as hard as it is for us to hear, right? I think some of them might just be a little, too negative, but I think ultimately you can learn a lot from the things that people have to say. So whatever that may be, if they're taking the time to leave you a review and they have these things, what they want to say about your work, then that's maybe something to listen to. But also, don't let yourself be bogged down too much by it all, because every author, no matter how famous and how good they are, it's someone's work is going to be hated on by someone. It's just never going to be you can't make everyone happy type of thing. So just try to hold your head high and just keep following your dreams, because it's something that can never be perfect to everyone.
Absolutely, Val. Absolutely. And before we get to the last reflective question, before we go into the business side, there was another fan question I wanted to ask you. Now, I know you're still currently working on Star Relic, so me not give too many spoilers for this question, but maybe you can answer these for ages. And the questions are, what has been your favorite scene or moment to write in Ages, as well as the most challenging scene to write in Ages?
I'd have to think back. Maybe can I just answer this for Star Relic?
Absolutely, of
I
course.
think there are some scenes that won't be spoilers that I can speak on. So the one that's been the most challenging, I'd say, was a certain battle scenes in particular, even with Aegis, have always been difficult for me. Describing everything and getting the motivation to go into all of the things that occur, I feel like is more challenging for me. They just aren't as fun, I guess, as certain other scenes. So those are always a little more challenging. And I'm sorry, what was the other one that you asked about?
Your favorite scene or moment to write.
Okay, so with Star Relic, I think, there are so many that are good. I just finished editing actually chapter 21, which is a birthday scene. And I don't know if that's my favorite, but it's definitely up there. It's really one of the top ones. It's just a very good scene between the main character and her love interest. There's a lot of chemistry that's happening kind of for the first time. And a lot of things that I can't touch on, but that will leave you wanting more, I feel.
Awesome. Awesome, Val. And this leads to another really good reflective question, which I'm very eager to hear your thoughts on. So, context for this question, I've been doing this show now for about 6, 7 years. And out of 400 episodes, I've interviewed almost 200 authors, and I've learned a lot from all of them. And from these interviews, I've learned that a majority of them, being indie authors, began their writing career back in 2020 during the COVID years, the lockdown years.
Mm.
And from these interactions, I've come to the conclusion that the COVID lockdown years became a breeding ground for new authors, for new talent in the industry, artists, editors, narrators, so forth.
Mm.
And as things have changed, you do see this influx of new talent, with some people saying that we're in a golden age because of it. I argue we're in a new age, or rather, an iron age. It's less shiny, but it has a strong foundation. But also, there is the topic, of course, of AI entering the industry now more than ever. And I know this probably hits very close to you, not in addition to being an author, but also an artist as well.
Mhm.
So, for you, Vel, and from your experiences or from what you've seen and observed, do you feel that we are in a golden age slash new age? And what are your thoughts on AI entering the publishing world?
So I'm glad you asked this because, yes, it really relates to me and also even my Star Relic book. So COVID definitely opened the floodgates on creativity. People
Hmm.
finally had time to turn their ideas into words. And the result was an explosion of new voices. Whether we call it a golden age or an iron age depends on how you measure value, I guess. In sheer volume, it's unprecedented. In quality, it's kind of a mixed bag. I think it's less about a single age and more about a dynamic, evolving marketplace where brilliant works and forgettable ones are being born side by side. And with AI, like most people interviewed on this subject lately, it seems, I believe AI, like almost any technology, is a tool. It can be used for immense good or harm, depending on
Hmm.
how we wield it, like magic. Also, most people don't realize how surrounded we are by it. We have predictive text and voice assistants and facial recognition, like on your phone, streaming recommendations and Siri and Alexa. So it's absolutely everywhere. And some of those things are incredibly good. Like we have healthcare advancements and early diagnosis of diseases and even predictive models. There are a lot of accessibility tools that help people with disabilities and things like climate monitoring and disaster relief. So all of these are really wonderful, beautiful solutions to our problems. But
Absolutely.
I recently read something that stuck with me. So for the first time in history, studies show the most regressive, misogynistic views toward women are now the most common among the youngest in society. And so that points to something deeply broken, especially in how algorithm-driven platforms like TikTok are serving boys and men content that reinforces hatred and entitlement
Mhm.
and extremism. And so as a mom of a daughter, that also terrifies me.
Mm.
So, and as an artist, too, the growing presence of AI makes me worry about the future of creative work. If I ever were to re-enter the job market, would the role even exist anymore? AI thinning the workforce isn't just theoretical, it's already happening. In fact, I saw a segment about it on the news the other day where they were discussing college grads struggling, being that entry-level positions, especially in tech, are not as available as they once were. So we need real solutions here, like universal basic income, education reform, AI accountability laws, and just infrastructure that supports people and not just profit margins. As an author, AI is intimidating because it kind of discredits us writers who have been doing this for ages and who are either established in some way or are still working on getting recognition. We have dumped innumerable hours of our lives into our craft, and now folks are out here writing entire books with generative AI. So where does that leave us? And Now everybody's scrutinized and the subject of suspicion. And in many ways, that fear and complexity is reflected in Star Relic's antagonist, Ion, who's a hyper-intelligent AI that was created to protect planetary ecosystems. But like her creators, she is not perfect. She makes cold, utilitarian choices she believes are for the greater good, but they end up hurting the very beings she was designed to safeguard. I won't say much more on this, so you'll have to read the series to see how that impacts things and what the protagonist is eventually able to do in response.
Absolutely, absolutely. And just also to add to that, my best argument to use for like anyone using AI in terms of like creativity, it's like asking an alcoholic seventh grader to do the work for you. It's not going to be pretty. You're going to end up being the editor. And also, AI, what it has done in the publishing world, it mass produces a false sense of creativity. And I share that with my friends. I was like, yeah, it is. It is very true, especially more and more books entering the publishing world. Some of them are written with AI, and of course, people like ourselves trying to refine our craft and really showcase who we are. And that leads perfectly into the business side of being an author, with some little icebreaker questions, Vel. So, when you began publishing your books, what was the most surprising aspect that really shook you about the publishing industry? And from where you are right now on your journey, is there anything you would have done differently in terms of publishing your books?
Yes. So when I first published my Earth's Etheric Aegis books, I didn't know a lot of things. I think I was just going in kind of naively hopeful, and I didn't know about ARC readers, which are very important. And that's something that I'm definitely going to be doing differently with my Star Relic books. So when I published those, I didn't have any reviews for them early on. And so it was kind of hard to get the ball rolling, people noticing my books. And yeah, I think just the whole publishing experience is just kind of overwhelming when you're getting into it as an indie author. There's so much that goes into it. Being an artist, I'm able to design my own book covers, so I didn't have to worry about that aspect. But, you're still fighting Amazon or, whatever it is you're publishing to. For, in my case, it was Amazon for Kindle and for paperback versions, and for the paperbacks and then later the hardcovers, just getting it to accept the dimensions and all of the formatting and all of that was, pretty tricky for me to navigate by myself.
Yes, absolutely. And from the marketing side, another thing which is important is the audience. The audience is probably the thing that's crammed down our throats so much for being authors. But that also begs the question, do we always have to market to our audience, or can we market to our readership, whether it's, YA, NA, middle grade, or AF, which is adult fiction? Now, for you, Vel, do you have a good idea of your audience? And in your opinion, do you think authors should market to their readers in addition to their audience, their target audience?
So for me, I think that my target audience, I think, is someone that I've been working on writing towards, but more than anything, I've written for myself. It's just a hobby as much as a passion, and like all obsessions, it's something that I feel utterly inclined to pursue. So it feels almost incumbent upon me at this point. It's partially why I feel like I was born. So if anyone happens to enjoy what I write, then obviously that makes me incredibly happy, but that's just a bonus to go along with this compulsive commitment that I have. And I feel like I do know my target audience because it's, at least in the case of Star Relic, that would be anyone above the age of 15 who's ever felt othered or different, or sad and alone, or happy and alone, or too much or too little, or too weird, or like they've had to minimize themselves to be accepted. Because I think that definition fits me pretty well. I've always been a bit different and not what people expect, and very, very nerdy. So I remember one time in college, actually, a boy in one of my gen ed classes found out I was a video game art and design major. And he absolutely lost his mind. He couldn't believe it. He kind of raised his voice and said, "But you look so normal." So yeah, I've been on this journey of this personal journey of self-discovery throughout the years. And I've even had a handful of friends recently, including my best friend from high school, who's now a PhD, tell me they think that I'm neurodivergent in some way. And I am definitely some kind of way. So maybe a little neurospicy. Like I said, I've just been a bit different and struggled to fit the mold. So I feel like that kind of helps me relate to a lot of the people that would take an interest in a book like Star Relic.
Absolutely, absolutely. And this leads perfectly into the next question, which is our voice and our individuality as authors. Because I definitely think you can agree, Vel, that whenever we write or publish a book, we really have to consider, okay, if we're writing into, let's say, the YA readership, the YA genre, or I shouldn't say genre, but the age category, there are certain expectations that have to fall, or readers of that group are looking for. And this is this balancing act where we have to showcase our individuality, but understand the genres that we're writing in. So you don't want a story that's so original that it completely confuses the reader, but you don't want it to be so familiar that it feels like a carbon copy or a rip-off of something else. So for you, Vel, how have you been able to balance these two to showcase your uniqueness and individuality as an author and write stories that are very familiar, that hit that nostalgia feel?
So in my case, I think with Star Relic, I've been able to, well, this is the first time that I'm writing a character like this that's very whimsical and fun and quirky and just kind of unlike a lot of characters that we encounter in romantasy books in general. And I think with this particular book, it's been well, okay. I'm sorry, I'm losing my train of thought again. What was the question?
So the question was, so as you mentioned earlier, that you didn't really feel like, fit into like these like boxes or like categories, but I think as authors that we shouldn't be restricted, but we should showcase our individuality. But if we're writing, we have to understand that if we're writing a certain genre, there are certain expectations that need to follow, or writing something that's this balancing act between originality but familiarity. So how have you been able to balance the two for Star Relic?
So with Star Relic, I think it's a mixture of the two, and hopefully it maintains that balance pretty well. I've already mentioned a few of the things that have inspired it, but I have not actually encountered a book that is similar to it. The closest one I would say is Gear Breakers, which is another sapphic book that has a lot of sci-fi mech type things. But that's also kind of why I'm writing it, because it is a little bit different. It probably does relate more to She-Ra and the Princesses of Power than anything. But I think a lot of it will feel pretty original to people.
Awesome. Now, just in case any viewers do ask, what do you mean by, or what does the term sapphic mean for novels and storytelling?
So sapphic is women who love women. It's either lesbians or bisexuals, or it could be pansexuals. But it's just explaining that there is a romance that occurs between two women.
Okay, perfect. Okay, thank you for the clarification, because I kept hearing that. I was like, I know I've heard that before in writing and for books, but I wasn't entirely sure. And this actually comes into another fan question, which I actually really, really like. And are there any book recommendations that you would like to make that have also helped hone your writing skills in terms of, introducing characters or how they bring their worlds to life or even their magic system?
Yes, actually. So there are several books that I love. These Hollow Vows and These Twisted Bonds by Lexi Ryan. Anything by Kate Avery Ellison, too. She's a fantastic author that I've followed for some time, and every one of her books that I've devoured has been really, really good. And when I was a child, one of my biggest inspirations was Kenneth Opel's books, especially the Silver Wing series. And then more recently, I read The Kiss Quotient by Helen Huang, along with all of the spin-off books. And they're about autistic individuals finding love and are just amazingly good.
Awesome. Awesome. And also to make my own recommendation, and I can't say enough good things about this duology, and I'm wondering if I have it here. Okay, this is the first book, and this is by author Shelley Parker Chan, and that is She Who Became the Sun. It's an alternate history story where you see the rise of Ming China. But the difference is the person who would become the unifier, he ends up dying. So what happens? His sister takes his place. And all it calls like in this kind of Mulan kind of S story, she dons the persona of her brother. She does fall in love. Funny enough, I'm not mistaken, she actually takes on, I believe it's the brother's fiance, and it's not until I believe the end of book one, beginning of book two, that she feels comfortable who she is and realizes I don't have to hide who I am anymore. And she makes a declaration, this is me. I have taken on this name. It may belong to my brother, but it is my own. And it is such a good story. So she became the sun, and or I think it's like he who drowned the world. And it's such a great duology. I cannot say enough great things about this book. And I hated that it ended in book two. I hated that how it ended. But this kind of goes into another topic of, endings, the business side of endings, of like, when to make an ending and how to make sure the ending's satisfying. Now, Vel, I know, as you mentioned, that you are still working on Star Relic. So you probably don't want to give too many spoilers for these questions, but ultimately, as an author, how do you ensure that your endings are satisfying, and how important is it from an author side and also a business side to say, okay, this is the ending. I can't write anymore. I could, but it's going to be a completely different story, or it's going to be a part two.
So endings are extremely hard. You're absolutely right. And it's hard to determine just where you should end things, because honestly, there are times where I'm like, well, I could write more, but that could maybe just be another spin-off series for what happens in the future.
Mhm.
But I think that's something that I have a vague idea of in my head with all of my books. But because I am more of a pantser, I would say I don't have an exact idea of where I'm going with
Mm.
the ending. And I just kind of tackle it when I get there. So for me, I think that's kind of been the trend. When I start approaching that, I'll think more in what I should, where I should take it, and kind of incorporate that in all of my notes and then figure it out more on the fly.
Absolutely, absolutely. And as we're nearing the end of this incredible interview, there are a few last questions I want to ask you before we reach the end. Now, this question I think is important to ask, and that is networking as an author, which is vital.
Mhm.
Networking is huge because it allows us to reach, again, new viewers, new readers, and also make connections with, how do I go about making an ARC team? How to go about making a beta team or a street team, or what companies have you used to make your book covers, or what's the best platform to make a website and all that stuff. So for you, Vel, this is again another two-parter. In your opinion, as a creative, how important is it to really begin growing your networking circle? And are there any special shout outs you want to give to people who have helped you on your journey?
It's absolutely essential. As difficult as it can be, I think we need to really put ourselves out there. And that's something that I didn't really do a lot of, kind of like I touched on earlier with my first debut novel. But you really have to do that in order to get yourself known. So interacting with the writing community, making friends and being present across all social media is just really, really vital. And there have been so many people that I've met along the way. Who can I name? There's been so many people that I've made friends with over the years. And honestly, I probably can't even name them all. So it's probably going to be too much to say. But I think that ultimately a lot of them have helped me on my writing journey, whether it's just through encouragement and being present, or reading my stories or segments of my stories and giving feedback. All of that has been incredibly helpful to me. And I think that's something that a lot of authors that are just kind of entering this scene need to be aware of, that you really need to join all the social media and, try and build your brand.
Yes, and speaking of building one's brand, I've heard that so many times at so many conferences, which leads to actually a very fun question and rather a scenario. So to lead up to that, we talked about a lot of things about being an author, but I think the most important thing to note is that in this industry, it's not a money maker, it's not a get-rich-quick scheme. There are two paths for authors: to be known as an author and to be an author. Down one path, you're growing your brand. The other path, you're honing your skills, being a wordsmith. And ultimately, are there exceptions to the rule? Are there people who become multimillionaires overnight from their first book? Absolutely, but those are the exceptions. And I definitely feel in the plethora of interviews or workshops or discussions that I've seen thus far, there are so many things to learn about the industry. So, but Laura, I want you to imagine this. Let's say you've been invited to lead a discussion, and in your workshop slash seminar is a room full of aspiring authors from, students, poets, script writers, everyone in the creative industry, and possibly even some artists here and there. Of the plethora of topics to choose from, what is the one topic you would like to share and teach them that can also be a pearl of wisdom to them?
So I think for me, something that would interest me the most to speak on would be the relationships between characters. So growing up for me, I was always a huge Buffy the Vampire Slayer fan, and just a lot of Joss Whedon's works. And I think a lot of that kind of translated into my writing, where I absolutely love writing characters and the dynamics between all of the characters, not just romances, but how characters can interact and behave with one another, and how that kind of can change based on different scenarios and things that happen. So I think really diving in there and discussing how you can make your characters come across as likable and relatable and interesting, and how they can feel like they're living people when they're interacting with one another, is something that would be a really fun thing to discuss.
Absolutely, Vel. Absolutely. And we've now reached the final question, which is the last fan question. And I think it's a really sweet one. And the question is, with everything you've learned as an artist and as an author and as a person, ultimately, what do you want people to take away from your writings, from your works?
That is a really good question. So I think more than anything, I think it would be amazing if people would feel something after reading my books, being able to kind of tap into their emotions and make them feel happy or even sad in some parts, and feel like I've really touched them in some way would be the most meaningful thing to me, to be able to do that to someone just with my words.
Absolutely 100%. And with that, viewers and listeners, we conclude this amazing author interview here on Tales from the Wandering Scribe. I want to give a huge thank you to Velora for making her official debut here on the show. Now, Velora, where can people find you on social media if they want to reach out? And where can people buy copies of your books? And do you have any ARC applications open for Star Relic?
Yes, so I am on pretty much all social media at Velora Venn. And you can find my books on Amazon if you search my name, Velora Venn. And I actually do have ARC applications open for Star Relic. You can find them on my Instagram through my link tree. It's the second link, I believe. However, the ARCs probably won't be sent out until, I would say, later this year, probably towards the end of the year, since I'm still in the progress of editing my manuscript. But you can definitely apply right now.
Awesome. I will link all those down below in the description of this video. Thank you again, everyone, for joining us for another amazing, incredible author interview here on the show. A huge thank you to Velora for making her debut. We wish her the very best. And if you'd like to see her back on the show for a follow-up interview or to be a part of the Writers Hub, my new series, comment down below. And as always, viewers and listeners, make sure to like, comment, and subscribe to stay up to date with all new episodes coming out later this week and the weeks after. And make sure to follow me on my social media, as well as check out my website, thewanderingscribe.com. And until next time, this is the Wandering Scribe and the Wandering Quill signing out. Wish you all a wonderful day wherever you are in the world, and we'll see you all in the next episode.